Okay, today we'll be discussing part of our beef feedlot roundtables. Really excited. We have three topics for our session today, and the first session that we'll have is on feedlot audits and assessment tools, and really excited to have Jesse Fulton with us. He is relatively new to Nebraska Extensions, and he's our Nebraska BQA coordinator. But I would say is the world's expert on BQA because he came to us from NCBA, where he was involved in the national BQA. So Jesse, I will stop sharing and turn it over to you to share your screen.
All right. Okay, well, thanks for having me here again today. Very excited to cover off on feed yard auditing. If there's any feed yard producers on here, I know when you hear the word audit, you get a little nervous. A lot of people, the first time they hear the word audit, they immediately jump to thinking about the IRS showing up on their place and seeing where all their dollars are going. But let me just be the first to say that this is not what feed yard auditing is. The feed yard audit process is more along the lines of just kind of doing what you say you're doing. So you talk the talk that you follow BQA guidelines and things on your operation, but do you really walk the walk? And so we're just going to kind of cover off on it. Gotta make sure my slides will transition. So why is feed yard auditing becoming a hot topic these days? Well, there's a growing demand for those third-party audits, but why? It's to help answer the questions for beef product customers. And so when the Costco, the Walmart, the McDonald's comes to Tyson or Cargill and asks them, are these animals being raised under BQA guidelines? How do you know they're following these practices? That's why these audits are taking place. It's to help answer those questions and verify the actual workings of the feed yard. We should already be there in a way when we talk about feed yard auditing. In the past, the whole goal was for us to get all employees and all feed yards BQA certified and implementing those programs on their operations. Today, we're trying to get many of our feed yards to participate in the BQA feed yard assessment. And this is just something that helps them get prepared for the U.S. Cattle Industry Feedyard Audit Tool. So the future is moving towards third-party auditing. So some current audits that are out there right now. One, if you sell your cattle to Tyson, you're already aware of the Tyson Farm Check. It was launched back in October of 2012. Third-party auditors from Tyson come and check up, or from maybe IMI Global will come up to an operation, and that if you source or supply Tyson with your cattle, they're just looking at things like animals' access to food and water, proper human and animal interaction, and then worker training is what the Tyson Farm Check program kind of focuses on. They do reference beef quality assurance guidelines a lot in the Tyson Farm Check program. It requires all Tyson cattle suppliers to be BQA trained. And then a number of audits that are conducted in a year are statistically calculated and are randomly selected based on how many head of cattle that you supply to Tyson. So in 2019, they only did 131 audits on the feed yards that supply them with cattle. However, Tyson is making a shift. So if you were participating in the Tyson Farm Check program originally, they are making a shift to the U.S. Cattle Industry Feedyard Audit Tool. And we're going to cover off on that audit tool as we move through this presentation. However, they do have some addendums to the U.S. Cattle Industry Feedyard Audit Tool. And that is, they have a section on the secure beef supply, and they have a section on the U.S. Roundtable for sustainable beef metric questions. So I was able to acquire what those addendums are. So this is around the secure beef supply. Just to let you know that this section is not scored. The only thing they're doing is to see if you already have a secure beef supply plan in place, if you're in progress of creating one, or if it's not even in place yet and you haven't even thought about it. Now, our third presenter today, Dr. Brian Vanderlei, he is going to be covering secure beef supply, so be sure you stick around and hear from him. Nebraska's got a great thing moving forward to help our feed yards get this implemented on their operations. The other addendum is the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef Framework. 5 questions here. Again, not graded, just asking, is it in place, in progress, or have you not even thought about it yet? So just know that when they do things like this, typically it's to get you prepared, because within the next 3 years or so, they will make it a graded portion of their audit. So finally, the other audit, the audit I was talking about, the U.S. Cattle Industry Feedyard Audit Tool, it's owned by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. They did not write the tool, they just own it. The whole idea was this is so that feed yards wouldn't be subjected to multiple audits, they would only be subjected to one. So what I mean by that is we don't have our big four packers writing a different audit of their own. And if you're a feed yard that sells to two different packers, you have to go through two different audits. You only have to go through one. So that's the whole idea of this. It was developed under the direction of the Animal Health and Wellbeing Committee at the Cattle Industry Business Meeting that takes place each summer. And the authors of this audit tool include feed yard owners and managers, veterinarians, animal scientists, packers, extension agents, and trade association representatives. This tool is free and it's utilized for utilization by any organization. And the cost to you is only associated with the third-party auditor. So depending on who's doing the audit, they may have a charge for the feed yard. I've talked to a couple of the auditing organizations. I kind of know where they're at and what they're thinking about for pricing. It's going to be around maybe that 1,500 mark. Don't hold me to that. That's just what they told me originally. Auditors for this audit tool must be Professional Animal Auditor Organization certified, so PACO certified. To find out more what that organization is, you can go to animalauditor.org. And they also must be BQA certified. The reason around that is because this tool, its foundation is based in the BQA program. So we need to make sure our auditors have an understanding of what BQA is. Now, the final audit that I want to kind of talk about, I won't go in very much detail with this. A lot of people already know what Progressive Beef is. It is privately owned. It's utilized already by Tyson and Wendy's. They have a stronger focus on sustainability. Some of that sustainability focus they look at is the efficiencies of operations. So what type of technologies you utilize. Another thing that they lump under sustainability is employee retention. So how long feed yards are able to keep their employees. They cover safety training and what the operation does for their community. They do have a mobile app for this. This mobile app helps them with their record keeping and tracking process like that. They do have an annual internal Progressive Beef audit. So a Progressive Beef worker or beef specialist will come to your operation and do an audit. And they also have a third-party audit auditor come to your organization. That is to maintain your certification with Progressive Beef. There is a premium paid for people that participate in the Progressive Beef program. So I just want to pop up an example here. So what if you sell your cow, Tyson? What's this mean for you? Because Tyson has their farm check program, which will now be the U.S. Cattle Industry Feedyard Audit Tool, and they also have their Progressive Beef. So if you can see my cursor, which I hope you can, if you do not participate in Progressive Beef, you will go under the farm check program, which is that U.S. Cattle Industry Feedyard Audit Tool. They will come to your operation and audit you once every 3 years. If you participate in Progressive Beef, that's the audit you will be subjected to. So you will never be subjected to both of these audits, only one. So don't fear that you're going to be audited twice in 1 year. Tyson only audits every 3 years. So I know I mentioned before that Progressive Beef will come out annual for an audit. That's to maintain that certification with them. Tyson will only audit you every 3 years. So the U.S. Cattle Industry Feedyard Audit Tool, if you want to see it, it's no secret. It's out there. You can look through it and review it. Go to ncba.org/feedyardaudit.aspx. You can download a version of it and look through it. The scope of the audit, the whole idea around it is so that any feed yard, independent of their size, housing type, if they're an open yard or if they're undercover feeding, breed of cattle, this for people that might be feeding down in Texas that have a lot of eared cattle, or geographical location, differences in those, you should be able to pass this audit tool. It does track cattle from receiving all the way through shipping. And the whole idea around this audit tool is they review the records, protocols, animal observations, and processing and facilities. The feed yard must be or should be operating under normal conditions. So let's look back to 2019. We had a lot of flooding here in Nebraska. We had a lot of wet pens. If you were subject to an audit during that period, you could contact the auditing client, so Tyson, Cargill, whoever it might be, and let them know, hey, we're not operating under normal conditions right now. We're really wet. We're trying to deal with a natural disaster currently. Can we reschedule this? Now, a lot of those organizations will oblige to that. Typical preparation for the audits, the auditor needs to reach out to you before they come to let you know you will be audited. This helps you get your stuff together, your paperwork, and are ready for them to help speed up the audit process. Most audits only take a day, but if you are a larger feed yard, it could take additional time. There is an audit preparation checklist at the back of that feed yard audit tool in the appendix. So if you go look at that, you can see exactly what you need. But we're going to cover a lot of that today. I'd already mentioned the competency of the auditors. Whoever comes to do an audit on your yard, they need to be PACO certified, and they need to be BQA certified, but they also need to have working knowledge of animal husbandry and the cattle industry, feeding industry. Now, when auditors go through PACO, they get a lot of this knowledge. PACO just doesn't let anyone become an auditor. They have to go through a 3-day course and additional education. They also have to recertify annually, and that means they have to participate in continuing education credits to maintain their certification. How's the audit scored? Like I said, we're looking at protocols, records, and your best management practices. Questions are ranked in points based on the importance of the authors of the audit, if they were critical, high, elevated, or low. There are some corrective actions within this audit. Now, the audit, how it reads, is recommended corrective actions. However, I know for a fact that with Tyson using this, they are going to make anything that was recommended a corrective action an actual corrective action. So what that means is if you have, I took a screenshot of the mandatory corrective actions and the continuous improvement plan corrective actions. And what that means is if an auditor shows up to your organization, your feed yard, and they see that you don't have your VCPR form or you don't have any proof of a veterinary client patient relationship, then you're going to get put under a mandatory corrective action. What that is you just need to develop that veterinary client patient relationship with your herd veterinarian. We do have a form available at bqa.org to where you can get that filled out with your veterinarian and have that record on hand. The audit client can also determine additional corrective actions. So if they have something that we don't have listed here that they find is very important, they can add that to their corrective action plans as the audit client. There are critical failures in this audit tool, and they can be assessed at any point in the audit. Now, I have a list of those on the next couple of slides. And what that means is if they witness anything that's on the list, then they will fail the audit immediately or terminate the audit immediately. You'll fail it. And they will work out a plan that once you have made the corrective actions, they will come back to the audit for, they will reschedule to come back to the feed yard to finish conducting the audit. But they will be starting the audit all over. So you need to ensure that you do not have any critical failures. So what are some examples of those willful acts of abuse? Here's the list. I'm not going to linger on this too long, but there are several things on here that you need to be aware of. These are also listed under Beef Quality Assurance, and they are listed in that Feedyard Audit Tool that you can review. Here's some of the examples of egregious acts of neglect for your review as well. Same thing, falls under BQA. There is one thing to note that if the auditor is on your operation, and even though it's not listed in these two lists, if they witness something that they feel is an egregious act of neglect or an egregious act of abuse, they can still terminate the audit. And they will let the feed yard manager know and tell them exactly why they terminated the audit. So for procedures and records, right now, there's a lot of feed yards that may have a procedure that they follow, but it's not documented, or they follow a procedure, but they don't have any records. So where applicable throughout the audit, there are parts where partial credit is offered. So if a feed yard does not have a documented protocol, but they can interview an employee to demonstrate how that protocol is implemented, the feed yard will receive partial credit for that question. Same way for records. Now, records need to be kept for at least 2 years and be made available for the auditor. Now, I'm not saying the auditor will sit there and go through all 2 years of records for each of these protocols. It just means that if they're sitting there and they did an audit today, they could say, I would like to see a record from October of 2020 for your daily care or your pulls from your pen. And so if you can provide that, that's suitable for them. So what are the things they're going to be looking for throughout the audit? What are things that you need to be aware of? The first one is the feed yard self-assessment. For this audit specifically, it's the BQA feed yard self-assessment. It needs to be completed within the last 3 years of the audit date. You have to have a feed yard manager or key employee certified to be BQA certified. This is mainly around for the key employees. If they are the cattle processing crew, the lead guy for the cattle processing crew is suitable for that. It's all about if you're training your employees under BQA guidelines. There's also an employee training program that you have to have implemented, and that you are training employees in their area of work. There is a herd care or animal health section. They do have 2 questions on here that I want to point out, and it's around the veterinary client-patient relationship. Question 7 is very specific in that you have to have a VCPR form. Now that form is easy to get your hands on. There's veterinary sites that have it. BQA.org has one available for you, and so does the Nebraska BQA website has that form available for you. So you print it off, fill it out with your veterinarian, and you're good to go for that question. Question 8 is all around records, verifying that that relationship exists. And this is everything from vets coming out to do a visit and their reports, having billing records, or any other proof documents. I'm kind of going to speed through a lot of these. I don't want to linger on too long. I don't want to bore you with a lot of the details. Like I said, you can go online and find them. But there are just several things throughout that I just want to make you aware of, such as the herd health management protocol. You have to develop that with a veterinarian. The surgical procedure protocol, same thing, developed with the veterinarian. That is for anyone that is castrating, dehorning, or any other surgical procedures on their operation. Now, I put the definition that the audit uses for what a surgical procedure is classified as. So treatment through revision, destruction, or incision, closure, or other structural alteration of animal tissue. So if anything like that is happening on your feed yard, you need to have this protocol. This protocol could be as simple as, we do not do surgical procedures, we rely on our veterinarian. That is your protocol. That you rely on your herd veterinarian. So it's as simple as that. Calving, heifer, and newborn calf care management. The only way to get around this question is if you do not feed females, and you have to prove that. So if you only feed steers or males, you don't need this protocol. However, if you do feed heifers, it doesn't matter if you give them Lutalice before they show up to abort anything out. You still have to have this protocol just in case anything slips through the cracks. You need to have this. Cattle health product management protocol, just around any of your animal health products that you're receiving, how they're handled, storage, inventory. The inventory gets very specific. I included what they're exactly looking for. Again, there are going to be templates available for you that you can print off and just fill out and have these protocols already put together. Oh, I want to jump back real quick for the proper disposal of those products. The protocol for that can be as simple as, we dispose of our products by giving them to our herd veterinarian and allowing him to dispose of them. Like I said, some of these protocols can be very simple. Biosecurity protocol, very important. BQA is taking a deeper dive and getting more in depth with biosecurity. You need to have a biosecurity plan. They already have an excellent template up at bqa.org that you can fill out. When you read that template, it does seem a little overwhelming. When you, if you look down, you'll see that there needs to be a foreign animal disease outbreak contingency plan. That's more of an enhanced biosecurity plan. When you look at both a regular day-to-day biosecurity plan and enhanced biosecurity plan, it can be overwhelming. There's a lot there. They're asking a lot of questions, all the way down to, do you have a cleaning and disinfecting area for vehicles? Don't read too much into it. We're really just trying to get you to start thinking about this in the event that there was a foreign animal disease outbreak here in the US. We just want you to be prepared so that you're not sitting there and really worried and stressed out that you don't have this stuff. You've already thought about it. You've already worked with the veterinarian on what to do when it comes to biosecurity. Like I said, stay on for Dr. Vanderlei's presentation. Nebraska can really help you out. The veterinarians at GP Vet can really help you out developing these biosecurity protocols. Compromised animals. This is, can sometimes be a black eye on our industry. And so we need to make sure we have protocols in place and that we are following and implementing them. That's what it's about. This also includes a daily evaluation of your compromised animals. So making sure that you are evaluating these animals in a timely fashion to ensure they have food and water and that they're as comfortable as they can be. Mortality and carcass disposal. Again, typically this will kind of, it's based on the audit if you have it in place, but I do encourage you, for Nebraska producers, there are guidelines about how you dispose of carcasses. And so I know that I'm working right now to develop a proper carcass disposal template for you to use. So you can find that at our UNL BQA website. Euthanasia protocol must be developed with your veterinarian just to make sure you're meeting those guidelines set forth by either AABP or BQA. So one thing to point on here that failing to euthanize a chronically diseased or injured animal with a body condition score of less than 2 on the beef or dairy condition score is considered an egregious act of neglect. So if you're on a feed yard, once those animals get below a 2 and they're not having any improvement, it could be time to euthanize that animal. However, you can meet with your veterinarian. If your veterinarian does not agree with that, then you can continue to move forward, but it has to be under the advisement of your herd veterinarian. There are some feeding quality medicated records. If you're feeding medicated feeds, just making sure you have some of those protocols in place. Cattle handling and processing. They're looking for your processing map. They're looking for that you have a protocol for residue avoidance or safe to ship documents to make sure we're not shipping any animals from the feed yard that have not cleared withdrawal periods. 2 things on here: inclement weather. Now, for some parts of Nebraska, we are under extreme heat conditions a lot, especially with humidity and the temperature. Same way for cold conditions. We're under those a lot. And so just having those protocols, there are some resources in BQA, kind of what that is around. Most of the stuff for cold weather can just be, when it's below this certain temperature on the scale that they have in the audit, there is a scale, we increase the energy intake of our cattle. And that can be what your protocol is, or we add some bedding to the pens. Like I said, some of these protocols can be very simple. I've already talked about cattle processing and looking at that map, having certain things on there about how many cattle were processed, how you're administering your implants, things like that. Broken needle protocol, very important. This is just what your feed yard does in the instance of a broken needle to ensure that that animal does not enter the commercial beef supply. So that is a BQA guideline that we do not market cattle with broken needles in them in the commercial supply. However, you can still do salvage slaughter. And what I mean by that is take it to a local packer to where you are taking custody of the meat afterwards, or an employee. That means you are aware that there was a broken needle in there. You're able to communicate that with a custom packer that there was a broken needle, and hopefully they can identify it and it's not going into our public food supply. Pen surface maintenance protocol, just what you do to maintain your pens. Emergency action plan. A lot of these are really self-explanatory. Record keeping, I already mentioned, you need to keep it 2 consecutive years. Another thing to note is that your records have to have dated initials or signatures of responsible parties confirming their review. So that would pretty much be your feed yard manager or feed yard owner and the veterinarian of the feed yard. So there are some cattle handling things that need to be known about this audit, some observations they're going to do. So one of those is they're going to come out and watch 100 head go through your chute. Now, if you're a small farmer feeder and you're not feeding 100 head, you're only feeding 50, just as a little extra money, then they will watch all your cattle go through the chute. If the feed yard is going to be working more than 100 head, then they need to work out with you when's the best time for them to come watch processed cattle, but they need to see this. Now, if you are subject for an audit and you've already worked your cattle for the year, or, like I said, you're only doing 1 turn of cattle and you've already worked them and you're not going to be working anymore, then you just need to relay that back to the audit client and let them know and they'll probably reschedule your audit, or they'll probably conduct the audit without the animal observations and just make a note that they want to come back the next time you are going to process cattle. So just something to know. Home pen observations. They will go around to all the home pens, and those home pens must contain cattle. On feed yards, they are going to look at least 5% of your home pens, but a minimum of 10. So if you only have 2 home pens, they're going to look at both of them. If you have 9 home pens, they're going to look at all 9. Once you get over that threshold of 10, that's when that 5% comes into play. They're going to use a random calculator to pick which pens they're going to go to. They're probably going to contact you and ask you for a feed yard map to help them pick what random yards they go to. And they're going to ask you if there's any differences in topography to make sure that they're, if you have a feed yard where some of your pens are on a hillside and some are down the flat, they want to make sure that they're looking at pens in both locations to be more representative of your yard. So just to give you a little example of what this will look like. So if you have 300 home pens and they need to look at 5% of that, they're going to look at 15 pens. I know that's over the 10 pen minimum threshold, but that's how it's going to be for the 5%. If you only have 20 home pens, 5% is only 1 pen. That doesn't meet the minimum requirement, so they're going to look at half of your pens. They're going to look at 10 pens. For specialty pens, they're going to look at 50%. Those specialty pens are classified as your hospital pens, your sick pens, receiving, buller, railer pens, anything like that. That's classified as a specialty pen. They're going to look at half of those with a minimum of 3. Again, they're going to randomly select this. However, sometimes you'll have pens that won't have cattle. That's okay for this instance when it comes to specialty pens. And so they can write not observed. We'll talk about what they're actually observing in those pens as we move throughout this presentation. Oh, real quick, auditors, they're not going to assess locomotion or mud and manure in hospital pens only. So they're usually in the hospital pen for a reason. Could be a locomotion issue where they're laying down a lot. So auditors are not to review locomotion and mud and manure. And I'm going to touch on that a little more as we get a little deeper into this. Cattle observations, the auditors do have to observe a certain amount of animals on the feed yard. Now, this one gets a little confusing because it's based on this chart to where they have to look at to the point where they are 95% confident that they can detect disease within 1%. And so what this is if you have 100 head of cattle on your yard, they need to look at 96 of them. Once you get over 10,000, then that's the cap, and they only really need to look at 299 to fulfill the requirement. However, they are going to look at every animal in the home pens that they look at. So we'll get a little more detailed, I believe, on the next slide. Yeah. So for this example, they need to look at 284 animals. The auditor is going to observe 10 of your home pens on a 3,000 head yard, and you have 25 head of cattle in each pen. Now, the requirement, if they looked at those 10 pens, then they have only looked at 250 head of cattle. And so they haven't met the requirement. So now they have to add on additional pens to go look at more cattle to meet that requirement. And that could just be 1 more pen or 2 more pens in this case. Now, when they go to look at additional cattle, they won't be doing any more pen observations. And again, I'll tell you exactly what they're looking at for other pen observations, but just know that the individual animal observation is met. For the second example, where you would have 300 head in each pen, even though you're over that limit that they looked at 300 head of cattle, or looked at over 284 head of cattle, they're still going to look at the remainder of those cattle in those home pens. They do look at unloading and loading observations. So if you have a truck there that day that's loading out, or you're receiving cattle or loading out, they are going to assess up to 2 trucks. However, this isn't scored yet. This is something that had to be included into the audit in order for it to become a certified audit. But know that, like I said earlier with Tyson, when they make addendums, when it gets put in the audit, eventually it probably will become a scored area. And this isn't to say that the audit client couldn't go ahead and take it and say, actually, we're going to score this and add some points to it. So they could certainly do that. For the cattle handling observations that they make at chute side, they're looking at prod use. One thing with prod use is that it doesn't matter if they see you hitting the button on the prod and actually putting a charge to the prod. If they see the prod touch the animal, that counts as prod use. Miscatches is defined as if they catch the animal in any other position besides the head completely through the chute. It is also if you have two animals coming into the chute and you catch the second animal in the tailgate, that counts as a miscatch. Vocalization, if there's any kind of moo or bellow before the animal is processed. So if you haven't touched the animal and makes that noise, that counts as a vocalization. But if you've already started doing an implant, given an injection or ear tagging, that doesn't count against you. Jumps and runs are also audited. Stumbles is if the knee or hock hit the ground, and falls is if the brisket or belly hits the ground. Observations that I was talking about that they will be looking at in the pens is feed bunks. They're just seeing if they're accessible, making sure they're free of manure or foreign objects, which counts as rocks or anything that might got into the feed bunk. Also spoiled, moldy, sour packed feed. They're looking for that as well. Water tanks, they got to be clean and fresh. There is a little bit of a scoring scale on that. I don't have any images of that, but it's mainly around the buildup of algae and how much feed might be built up on the bottom. Now, we know it's impossible to keep a water tank clean for less than an hour, especially when cattle are eating and come to that water tank, they always drop feed. It's really assigned to how much buildup there is. Stocking rate, making sure there's available space for those animals. For anybody that has animals being fed under a roof or indoor cattle feeding, I believe this gets specific to where they have to be able to stand up or lie down at any given time. So if all the animals, when they're all lay down at one time, they should be able to. So that's how the stocking rate can get you in this audit. Pen facilities, making sure they're in good working order, all your gates swing freely. So if you have a gate that's on a pole, when you open it, the pole comes over and you have to stand it back up, they might get you on that one for being a broken piece of facility. So mud and manure, I talked about individual animal observations. This is the score they're using. It's out of Iowa State. So just being aware of this, it's amount of the buildup on the animal. The reason they went with this method is because they were having a little difficulty on how to decide how we know our pens are in good condition when it comes to mud and manure. We wanted to go with this route because even though the pen may look bad, if the animals look like a mud score of 1 or 2, they're obviously finding them a place to lay down where they're not getting caked with mud. Mud's important for BQA. It's one of our first preventative steps for food safety. We're keeping that hide clean so that when they go into the plant, they're not carrying any manure in the plant that could jeopardize the safety of that carcass. So that's why this is included. Locomotion, they use the North American Meat Institute 4-point locomotion scale. You can watch that scale on YouTube. Just type in NAMI locomotion training video, and you can see exactly what kind of details that goes into. When they do locomotion scoring, they do have to have all animals up and moving. And so in some companies, auditing companies, they do not allow their employees to go into pens. And so they will have someone there, one of the feed yard employees, to go in and walk the pen to have the animals moving around. Cattle handling facility observations. This is just look at if you can safely handle and restrain cattle. So looking at your chute, make sure it's in good working order. They're looking at non-slip flooring all the way through your alley, in your tub or bud box, whatever you use. They're looking for non-slip flooring, and also any mats or how your flooring is when they exit to chute. The gates need to swing freely, latch securely, no sharp protrusions that can injure the cattle, and there is a note in there about having adequate lighting. Same way for the cattle loading and unloading. They're looking at that stuff. For the trucker, he needs to make sure his trailer is properly aligned with that loading and loading ramp to prevent any injury for cattle or any gaps where they could escape. In the loading and unloading section for observations, they do have some observations for produce, stumbles, and falls. So if you do have someone that's loading your cattle and he is using a hot shot, they will be looking at that. And like I said, it's not scored yet, but the audit client could make it be scored, or it could be something that is scored in the future. So it's just something to get you prepared for that. So just here's an example, just an observation summary of what all I just talked about, what they're looking at, just for your reference. I do want to note down on the mud score and locomotion that they're only looking for animals that are 3 and above. So for the locomotion, it's 3 or 4s and downers. And then for the mud, it's 3, 4s, and 5s. So just being aware of that, those references are in the back of that audit tool, that mud score is, so you can go there and look at that. So how can you prepare for this audit tool? Well, it's pretty simple. Contact your Nebraska BQA state coordinator. Give me a call. I was actually on the writing group and manage the writing of the U.S. Cattle Industry Feedyard Audit Tool. I'm very familiar with it. I know exactly what they're looking for. I'm PACO certified. I'm helping get our feed yards here in the state BQA certified. I'll be happy to come out and do a third-party BQA feed yard assessment with you, even though it's a self feed yard assessment. You can do it all on your own. It's sometimes good to have that third party there because they have a different eye, a different look on what is actually happening. What you may see as a day-to-day practice on your feed yard, somebody from a third party will see it as maybe you need to look at this again, have some changes. It might not look good for the audit if you're ever subjected to one. So here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I highlighted the Nebraska BQA email because I check that one a lot more frequently because, you know, Galen emails me on my UNL email, and so I can always put him on the side. But when a producer emails me at Nebraska BQA, they jump to the top of my list. You know, I work for you all. I'm here to help you in any way I can. So please reach out if you have any questions. And with that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Any questions for Jesse? I don't see any in the chat either, Jesse. You know, we talked about this and you highlighted it some, but maybe reemphasize what about other packers and talking about Tyson and is this something everybody should be doing now to get prepared? You know, maybe speak to that.
Yep, I would definitely get prepared. It depending on who you sell your cattle to, for sure. But like I said, Tyson is, I believe it's this week that they are actually starting to roll out the first feed yards that they're going to start using this audit on for their Tyson Farm Check program. But you need to always remember it's kind of how the BQA certification requirements started for feed yards. So in the beginning, it started with Wendy's wanting to only purchase BQA beef from BQA certified feed yards. Cargill was the first packer to roll out that they were only going to source 90% of their beef from BQA certified feed yards, and then Tyson, National, and U.S. Premium Beef followed suit right behind. JBS does require you to sign an affidavit that you are BQA certified. So, you know, we witnessed what happened there with beef quality assurance. Now we're getting serious about auditing and it becoming more of a mandatory audit. So I would definitely get prepared for this. With Tyson doing it, Cargill will follow suit. I know they're really just waiting for one of their customers to ask. So when I say customer, anyone that buys beef from Cargill, all they got to say is we would like a third-party audit conducted on feed yards where you're sourcing this beef, and that's what will happen. So I would definitely get prepared for this. And I'm here to help you get prepared.
Thank you, Jesse.